People are still seeking meaning and purpose and spirituality. They're just not looking for it in the church. So what does that say to us as the church and what we need to be doing? Because actually the things that they're seeking, which has to do with connection and belonging and, deeper transformation and purpose and a sense of helping your community be better and accountability and all those sorts of things are the things that the church offers. And so, one thing we could say is, do we just work harder at what we're already doing? Well, that's not actually working. And so what do we need to do differently to help people really know themselves better, connect with the divine, connect with their communities? And anyway, so those are questions we need to be asking ourselves.
Welcome to Season 6 of the More Than Sunday podcast, where we tackle tough questions about our faith that many people have but are often afraid to ask. I'm Rohini Drake, and I'm on staff here at First United Methodist Church, Richardson. And each week, I'm joined by two guests who will help us jump in and tackle some of these tough questions. This week, we're asking the question, what might the future church look like? And can we even know what it might look like? And we are so grateful this week to be joined by Lisa Greenwood, the new president of Texas Methodist Foundation and Wesleyan Investive, and of course by our senior pastor of FUMCR, Clayton Oliphint. Thank you both for being here and joining us.
Thank you, Rohini. It's great to be with you.
Always good to be together, and we're so glad to have Lisa here.
Now, Lisa, I know that this is a new position for you. You just mentioned it's only been a few days into the position. And so I'm hoping you could share a little bit about what you intend to do and what your new role encompasses. But maybe start out with telling us how you're already connected to FUMCR.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. So let me start with that, because my roots and relationship with FUMC Richardson go way back. It's the church that my family joined when I was 10, when we moved to Dallas. So I was confirmed here and I grew up here going to youth group. I felt my call to ministry in high school here at First Richardson. And then I went away to college and I went to seminary and did all those things and came back to the annual conference where I was ordained. But my home church has always been First Methodist Richardson. I've served churches throughout the Dallas area and beyond in some of the outlying areas, and then came back to First Methodist Richardson to be on staff part-time before I went to the foundation. And so 10 years ago, I started with the Texas Methodist Foundation, heading up their leadership ministry, and have loved that role and have gotten to be a part of gathering clergy leaders, pastors, some key lay leaders across the connection, bishops, district superintendents, all in conversation with each other to help them be more courageous, to be networked and learn from each other. And that has been a tremendous work that I've gotten to be a part of with Texas Methodist Foundation. And in this role as president, the particulars, of course, are going to unfold as I live into this new role and begin to discover what the possibilities are. But in a kind of broad brushstroke, the things that I'm excited about are the fact that as we watch the church, the new religious landscape emerge and the church's role in that, I really believe that Texas Methodist Foundation and Wesleyan Investive have a role to play in helping the church be its strongest witness through our work with leaders, innovators, and our financial services that we offer the church. So it really, as a bit uncertain as the church's future is, it feels really good to be a part of an organization that just believes so strongly in the witness of the local church, and that we get to really help that witness be strong and courageous and vibrant, because the world needs the church more than ever. And so anyway,
Amen to
really fun to get to be in this role at this particular time in our landscape.
Well, thank you for sharing. And of course, we all wish you the best of luck
Thank you.
That. Really an article that you wrote back in 2019. And it was looking at the spiritual landscape and how different models of what traditional church or established church can look like. But then also comparing it to what we're seeing in kind of spirituality of people and how those trajectories are going in different directions. Can you share a little bit more about what you've seen in those trends?
Sure. So all kinds of research out there about what's happening with affiliation in our culture, right? So there was a period of time in our culture, and think first half of the 20th century and kind of a little tail through the 60s, 70s, where we really valued in our culture affiliating, joining with organizations. So whether you're talking Rotary Club or bowling leagues or local churches, folks were affiliating and joining, and that's how they found their community. And it was a time when, for the church, it was pretty easy to be the church and to grow. And all we had to do really was open our doors and welcome people, and folks were coming. It was just a matter of which church you were going to go to. And that, of course, changed. It started changing after World War II, but we really saw the effects mid-60s and following, where fewer and fewer people were affiliating with organizations. So Robert Putnam wrote this book a number of years ago, Bowling Alone, and so the anecdote there is that though more frames are being bowled, less people are joining bowling leagues. So bowling leagues are getting smaller and smaller, and more people are bowling. Well, that same kind of analogy could be said for the church. So we've seen membership decline since 1965, but it doesn't mean that people aren't seeking meaning and purpose in their lives. In fact, more than ever, the research indicates that people are seeking meaning and purpose, and even a connection with the holy or the transcendent, or whatever words you want to use for that. So if you look at that, if we were to graph that, it would look like a decline in affiliation, which is the line that the local churches are on, right? And a rise in spirituality, or a search for meaning and purpose and something more, something beyond what we can see and touch. And so that gap, if you will, between the decline in affiliation and the rise in spirituality is a real fertile ground for us, because the truth is, people are still seeking meaning and purpose in spirituality. They're just not looking for it in the church. So what does that say to us as the church and what we need to be doing? Because actually the things that they're seeking, which has to do with connection and belonging and, deeper transformation and purpose and a sense of helping your community be better and and accountability and all those sorts of things are the things that the church offers. And so, one thing we could say is, do we just work harder at what we're already doing? Well, that's not actually working. And so what do we need to do differently to help people really know themselves better, connect with the divine, connect with their communities? And anyway, so those are questions we need to be asking ourselves, right?
And, as you think about that, one of the things that I was thinking about is how do we measure? What are the metrics for the future church?
Right.
I was telling you, in my father's generation, it was membership. How many members do you have in your church? My generation was raised on what's your worship attendance?
Yeah.
That was the measure of vitality. But I don't know that in the future church and the church today, that's the right measurement. And we talk sometimes about engagement, and particularly community engagement for that.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first, I think you're spot on in terms of the trend, and that engagement is a significant piece of what we need to be looking at. But let's back up a little bit and say, okay, if a culture values affiliation, then it makes sense that then you measure joining, yeah. Right? And that members. All our systems were put in place to help people join. Mm-hmm. All of that is to say that made sense for that time and place. So if we're trying to, spread the good news and be our strongest witness, I think we have to change we have to get clear. Maybe that's the way to say it. We have to get clear on what our desired outcomes are. And our desired outcome really isn't joining. Our desired outcome is we want to transform lives and communities. So then we change how it is we begin to measure how lives are being changed and communities are being changed, which is your example of or notion of engagement. Because what we know is that if people are more engaged in their own faith development, then they are going to be more generous. They're going to have a greater sense of belonging. They're going to have a closer relationship with the divine, right? And so how do we help people get engaged? It used to be that engagement happened really within the walls of the church, right? So we had this sense of a spirituality of place. So the sanctuary is where you encounter the Holy Spirit and where you encounter God. And so we want to get people into the sanctuary. Well, right now, I think that has shifted from a spirituality of place to a spirituality of journey. So if you talk with someone about how they're growing in their faith, and these are deeply committed folks, right? If you talk with them about how they're growing in their faith and such, they're going to talk about, hopefully, some kind of daily routine of maybe meditation, maybe Bible study, reading their Bible. They're going to have a small group that meets in their home. Maybe it's a book club. Maybe it's a Bible study. Maybe there's both. They're volunteering at the local elementary. They're doing yoga classes. They're taking walks. And on those walks, they're listening to podcasts or they're, things that are helping them really look at their faith in new ways and grow as a person and think about how they're engaging their community and all those sorts of things. All of those things I mentioned, not a one of them had them walking into a church building. Okay, so we need to be thinking about how are people being formed and shaped and growing in their faith, and how is that a journey, and how do we equip them for that? Right. And we are so geared with our budgets, our staffing, our resources, our time and energy to getting people in the building. So this is a real shift for us in the church to think about how we're doing the very thing that we're seeking to do, which is to help form people. And
for a church like ours, do we stop doing what we're doing? Do we double down and say, this is what we do well, and so we should just keep doing what we do well? Or do we do both and? Do we find ways, should we be looking for ways beyond our walls to really make those connections? And I think I know your answer, but I think, right. But it seems like, it's easy just to fall back into the shell and like you say, get on that treadmill and just work harder, thinking that we'll get different results. Right. And part of what we do really works for us, but maybe there's more. Yeah.
So a couple of things I would say to that, and you could sort of, it is a both and, right? Mm-hmm. But if we go back to that graph, and this sort of low-hanging fruit of this area between the where the church is riding that decline and the growth in seeking spirituality and such, I think, and this is what I say in the paper, right? That the important picture there is that we need a mixed ecosystem of the religious landscape. We need really strong, vibrant, attractional model churches. And we need strong and vibrant missional-minded churches, meaning they've kind of turned themselves inside out in the community and they're engaging their neighbors in new ways. So it's not so much about gathering, but we're a partner in the community and we're going to walk along. But there are also house churches and coffee shops and laundromats and online faith communities developing and just on and on. And so this mixed ecosystem, this biodiversity is what we need moving forward. So, well, if you look at that picture of a mixed ecology of the church, strong attractional model churches are a critical element of that picture. We still need strong churches who are bringing folks into the sanctuary to worship, to grow, to encounter the Holy Spirit, and to go into the communities and make a difference. So we still need that. And let me say that a church like First Richardson and others like you, where you have resources, you have amazing staffs, talented staffs, deeply devoted and faithful laity and leadership in your congregations, you're in a way going to have the opportunity to be a kind of mixed ecosystem in your own sort of microcosm, if you will. You're still going to, this is, I'm suspecting, and I'm already seeing it, right? We've been talking about this for years, really, but you're going to still do excellent traditional worship and excellent modern worship, and you're going to have Sunday school classes that meet on campus and during typical Sunday morning hours and that kind of thing. But you're also going to have vibrant, small groups that happen all over the place. And you already have a vibrant online community, and you're going to think about what online space makes possible for formation. You're engaged in your community in partnership and collaboration kind of ways. So I just give that as an example to say, I think that mixed ecology can almost exist in a bit of a microcosm in some of our larger churches that witness to what it looks like to not simply be on the treadmill of what you have already done, but to think, this is what we do well, let's do that, but let's also think about what opportunities there are to reach some people who might not come through our church doors.
Good.
I would love to hear you all talk a little bit about what that looks like for you. I've named some things that I know from the outside looking in, but I'd love to hear you talk about that and what that looks like. But I'd also love to hear you talk about where you've met some resistance, like where you might have had folks kind of asking questions about how you're doing some things differently.
Well, I think in these seasons where I hear you mentioning things happen, discipleship happens, meeting the divine happens outside of our Sunday morning hours. That I don't think
Please, dear God, may it be so, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And I don't think that was written down on paper as a plan for what FUMCR has done. It has been a reaction to the pandemic. Online existed, we had capabilities, and growing and developing that intentionally to help connect the people that found us during the pandemic and wanted to stay with us, but couldn't come in person or lived too far away. And this church has grown definitely outside the walls, even outside of the city. But then also recognizing that in that we've created almost a decentralized Sunday morning service that people can engage with and worship on a Wednesday morning or a Friday night, whenever they are in that space to worship and to hear a word. And like you said, with podcasts, on YouTube, however people find it. And so at first reading your paper, it was like, oh no, I know which church this is. It looks like it's on the trending down. What do we do? But then recognizing that we've grown from that, like you said, that we've entered this ecosystem and we're reaching up towards those people that are looking for, that identify as spiritual and looking for something, that we're trying to meet them where they are. I do think we're still trying to figure out what that looks like.
And Rohini has done an amazing job with our online worship community of helping it become a community and really reaching people in that way. In terms of resistance, it's interesting how many people will still say to me, we're not at this, I wish the numbers were back where they were before the pandemic. We're probably at about maybe 75% of our pre-pandemic worship numbers in terms of in person
in the building.
In the building.
Yeah. Okay.
However, if you look at our overall totals, because of our online worshiping community, and it's not just Sunday morning, there's a lot of it during the week.
On demand, yes.
On demand, then we're worshiping as many, if not more, than we were prior to the pandemic. Yeah. So, I think there's real hope that, and that's where we're investing in terms of seeing that as our satellite campus. We don't have a satellite campus.
Great.
You helped start our first satellite campus, which was what became our modern worship community, which is thriving and doing wonderfully. And you helped set the tone for that. Our next satellite campus happened by accident with the pandemic. But now it's very much on purpose.
Yeah.
So does it feel like what you're seeing is that, like Pastor Clayton asked a little bit earlier, metrics and how are we measuring, that maybe some of the resistance, and I don't necessarily feel like it comes here at FUMCR, but I can imagine that resistance would be in, no, we've got to drive in that direction. And if we can see the people, then we know that this is growing and this is successful. But maybe some of that is, we will never know the reach. Right. We just have to kind of have faith and put it out there as this is what we as a church can do to reach people that are searching, and be okay with that. Can we even do that?
Right. I think one of the things that we see is, just natural, what you would imagine. And that is that in this time of uncertainty and all this change that's happening in the culture, but also in people's relationship with congregations, denominations, local churches, and such, is that there's heightened anxiety, right? And of course, the pandemic, we saw it, all kinds of heightened anxiety. Well, anxious people behave in predictable ways. They get reactive, they blame others, they sabotage leaders, they herd together for security, all these, and they seek quick fixes. And so when we are slowing things down and we're saying, we don't have an answer to this right now, but we're going to do the next faithful thing we believe God is calling us to do, then, we're inviting folks to be patient with not having a ready answer or seeing where it's all going to end up, but rather trying some things and experimenting and then just paying attention. So there's, in a way, you're right. I mean, we do kind of have to say, let's just try this and see. Let's not get overly anxious. Let's not start wringing our hands about 75% worship attendance, especially when you look at the whole picture and say, look at the people we're reaching. That's not cheating. That's actually a really valuable measure. Mm-hmm. And we grew up with that would be cheating. Yeah. I can't tell you how many churches said, oh, well, but we don't count our online.
Why not?
Why not? These are the people who are calling you church. Yeah. They are turning on their computer and they are watching you.
One of the stories from the pandemic is two young men that were watching. I don't know how they got connected to us, but they started watching. Their mother died and they reached out. They didn't have a church other than they watched us online but with their mother some. And so they reached to us and said, could you help us with your mother's funeral, with our mother's funeral? And so it was, it was a very natural, organic way that we were in ministry with someone in the community.
You were their church.
We were the church.
Yeah.
So, it's real.
Yeah.
It's not cheating. It's real.
Right.
No doubt.
Yeah. Yeah. And really important.
Lisa, you've been with Texas Methodist Foundation, and one of the reasons you're now president is with Wesleyan Investive and Texas Methodist Foundation is you have really helped us discover new models and that you've connected with people all over the country that are doing some really innovative and creative things. Mm-hmm. What are two or three of your favorite examples of people that are just knocking it out of the park in terms of just doing creative ministry in a different way?
Yeah. Oh my, I just feel like there's so many things out there. So let me start by saying, I would say one of our primary methodologies, if you will, in all of this work about thinking about the future church is just trying to have eyes to see and ears to hear, right? Just paying attention. What's the Holy Spirit doing? being connected with folks, saying yes when somebody says, hey, do you want to meet so-and-so? And so I can't tell you how many Zoom calls and phone calls I have with folks just hearing about their ideas or hearing about their ministry and those sorts of things. So it's not as if we've kind of figured out some formula or, have the market on this. We're just trying to pay attention and listen, and then even networking folks and being a part of other people's networks so that we can hear what's going on out there and what's happening. As I said, I think there's some large churches that have the ability and the staff and the bandwidth and resources to experiment. And that's been fun to watch and to be part of. Rohini's been part of a group of folks that are asking the question, what does online space make possible for spiritual formation? And so we've got a couple of folks who are doing some fun things. And there's a group at Ginghamsburg that are using VR headsets to connect people and just experiment with that. Like, what does that look like? And how do we form a group? We're in different places, but we're in the same room with each other and we're having conversation. And so that's a fun experiment out there. And another congregation that is a smaller congregation, really vibrant and vital and trying to do some things in their community. And they had a rise in online worshipers, and they wanted to move past peer-in worship experience to how do we engage these folks in community with each other? And they set up a meeting owl in their sanctuary space. And I don't know if you've ever seen a meeting owl, but it has this 360 panoramic view of who's in the, and so the folks who are on Zoom can actually see folks in the sanctuary, and those folks in the sanctuary can greet the folks. So they have a screen with your Zoom friends, and then they have their meeting owl. So I'm trying to give examples of different sized congregations doing some things. And then, of course, there's some really phenomenal ministries that are happening outside of congregations, but I think we can learn from. And so there's a ministry in Seattle that Resistencia coffee shop that is formed by two very faithful, devout Christian leaders, and they see that it's in this community where they live and move. That's primarily an immigrant community. And this coffee shop and all the relationships and connections in the community and commitment to helping the community be better has all been formed and shaped out of a desire to be the church, to be a witness in that community. But it really is a coffee shop, right? And full blown, but it is also a gathering place. It's also where networking happens. It's also where they have launched some community impact kinds of ministries. And so it is a social entrepreneur venture. Cote Sorens and her husband, Tim Sorens, have done this, but it's also very much integrated into a community of faith and a witness that is powerful. So, these are just kind of several different examples of
awesome.
Some great ministries that are happening out there.
And so I hear from that also what I think the whole intention of whether you're in church in person and whether it was from, the 50s or 60s and it felt like obligation to joining a church and being part of a church, affiliating. I think from being part of a church myself, I know that it's community. Yeah. That's what sticks and makes you stay. And that community helps you grow in your faith, and that makes you even more sticky into the place that you are. Yeah. And so whether that's in an in-person space or an online space or in a coffee shop, it feels like community and connecting with each other is the way to go. And so that definitely happens here in all of our spaces. Right. And we're praying that it continues to happen in the places we go into next. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe one last question would be that if there is somebody that feels a calling and or doesn't feel like traditional church or an established church is the place for them, what's a suggestion or recommendation for them?
Right. And you're talking specifically about somebody who is spiritually hungry but looking for community, belonging, that kind of thing. And you know, I would say some of it is we form it with our friendship circles. That's really what that's about. We're doing this work about, we call it New Wesleyan Ecosystem. It's a learning project for us, and we've gathered some leaders from across the country to be in conversation with each other about what the Wesleyan movement has to offer this emerging landscape, but also what the needs are of the spiritually hungry, and also what leaders need in the midst of this. Okay, so we've been doing this work, and one of the things we realize is we think of friendship as a byproduct of gathering people for church, for Sunday school, for youth group, that it's almost like it doesn't count. It's this thing over here. We don't focus on it as an end result. And this whole conversation has surfaced for us the aha, which seems a little silly that it's an aha, but it is, that friendship, meaning deep, meaningful relationships, vital friendships with each other, actually are an end goal here. Yeah. Like, that's how we encounter the divine and where we're known and loved anyway. So how do we sanctify friendship? Not put it aside or make it a byproduct, but actually make it, okay. So when we say that, then we say, you know, how do we help people know that if they're spiritually hungry, just gathering your friends with intentionality is a really sacred and beautiful act and can be part of your ongoing spiritual formation. Now, it's lovely to have resources, and there actually are some out there that we can tap into, some from the church and some not from the church. But there's some really beautiful and wonderful things happening. A dear friend, Casper Turkile, has formed something called the Nearness. And it is an online community, co-op, if you will, but it has all kinds of resources for how to form and shape your own spiritual formation and well-being, but also how to connect with others in that. And so just there are some really, I think, increasingly poignant, relevant, beautiful ways that folks can connect. And I think that's not a threat to the church. That's the church's work. Yeah. That's part of the witness, right?
Well, I mean, it seems like, you know, everywhere you go in the world, everything is transactional. So it's like you become a customer, and it's like, what can we get from this customer? Yeah. And in the church world, and you know, sadly, in the church world, you know, some relationships are transactional. It's like, what can we need to get new? I've heard people say, you know, we need to get new members so they can help us pay for this church, or we need to do this so that, you know, we just need to get numbers, and people are not numbers, you know. So the Christian community is not transactional. Right. It is relational. Yeah. It is about building deep relationships. Yeah. And I love that, what you just shared with that, because it just really hits me that it ought to feel different. Yeah. Whether it's a church, a traditional model church, or a non-traditional model faith community, it ought to feel different. Yeah. It ought to feel like we're here for each other. Yeah. And we are here in God's presence to bless each other. Yeah. That to me is where you're headed with that, I think, and that's it.
Yeah. I love it. I feel like that sums it up. As close as we could get to answering that question, I feel like that sums it up really well. I love the words of community, friendship, that's the future of the church, because that's the past and the present of the church as well. So looking forward to seeing what God does next in all these new seasons that we're entering. But Lisa, I want to thank you so much for joining us, spending some time with us to talk about this. I know you're busy, and we're just grateful to have you. And Pastor Clayton, thank you so much for joining us again on the podcast. We're so glad that you joined us today for season 6 of the podcast. We hope that you like this podcast and subscribe anywhere that you listen to your podcasts. And we also hope that you join us next Wednesday when we're joined by two new guests to answer another tough question. All of the resources that we talked about, or Lisa or Pastor Clayton mentioned, we'll make it available on our website, FUMCR.com/morethansunday. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you have a great week.